Today I'm going to paint a tree in very loose, easy style.
Hi friends, I'm Olga Koelsch, watercolor artist, teacher and a book author. Welcome to my studio.
First of all, let's prepare some mixes. As usual, I recommend to start from the lightest ones. I will mix lemon yellow with a bit of phthalo green to get this fresh greenery. I can also mix phthalo green with a little bit of vermilion to get more sage green tones. So firstly, I have my brush loaded just with water, and I'm dancing with my brush on my paper. To make it more fun, I can add a little bit of lemon yellow to the very top. I see that sun shines from the right. If we look at the shadow, we can always identify the place of the sunlight. So I will keep the upper part lightest one, and I can add a bit of green accents into this mix. But firstly, it's really fun to start with a simple shape. Sometimes I go a little bit aside of the main shape to add more branches and set up the general shape of the tree. I see that it has some fan structure, so I keep this in mind and playing around. I leave a lot of white areas in between. Sometimes I just press my brush with the body of the brush, and sometimes I use the tip of the brush. And then I try to bring all those paints, all those shapes a little bit to the center. So now the paper is all wet. It's time to add a bit of green accents. Remember to keep the upper right part the most light one. If you have wide range of greens, it's usually great opportunity to finally use your greens as they are, or you can use mixes, which I showed at the very beginning. I will use both. I love mixing colors and I think it's so fun. Let's find the most shadow part. It's kind of under this big area, so I add more of darker brush strokes in there. I can wash my brush, dry it a bit with a paper towel, and soften some elements. We have this big shape, and then with the tip of the brush I will add a couple of really fine details around. But now it's really time to add more shadow. I will use my phthalo blue. I will add a bit of ultramarine blue for colder part, for colder shadow. Underneath this branch, in the center of the tree, under some clusters of branches, and always great to dance around with the brush. Great spontaneous brush strokes. And now I will add the same vermilion, but now I will shift a little bit the proportion to the red part, and I start to use this mix for painting, shaping out tree trunk. Do it very, very loose. The shape is still wet, therefore we can't add defined details, but we can set up the general idea. Leaves create a lot of shadow, but when leaves not covering the trunk, the trunk suddenly is very bright and light. Now we need to emphasize that effect. I will add a bit of ultramarine blue into the shadow part, a couple of branches wet in wet. Let's add a bit of lighter leaves around. They're trailing down almost to the earth. Also, still, paper is still wet. I added a lot of water, therefore it still allows me to paint over. Now I basically not so much looking at the reference. I use what I already created here, trying to set up nice shape. Have sap green, which is also a nice beautiful color, but I will mix it with everything I have on my palette just for getting a little bit more organic greens. Sometimes ready-made greens, they look a bit unnatural, and we can improve that with mixing a bit like this. This is the most shadow part. Good to add a bit of darkness in that part. A bit on the top. I think the top part is already getting dry. I have to be very careful now not to create this. So for now I would rather stop and create the bottom and the shadow. So firstly I use warm green, olive green, just a hint of vermilion and a bit of yellow. So now let's place our tree onto the grass. I just create very quick brush strokes. It leaves a lot of white areas around, just around the tree. But remember, the sun shines from top right, and that creates pretty big shadow on the opposite side. And the shadow is very dark green. I will add a bit of ultramarine blue and a bit of vermilion. I need it super dark. And I paint around. Now as I have this nice deep green, I can add a bit more of shadow in the tree, add a little bit of fantasy, add some buildings or fence on the background. I don't want to go much into details. I think some kind of fence would be great, just like this, without many details. I can take my paper towel like this and apply, just very briefly press on the darkest spots and then remove. That will create pretty fun texture. It's enough to make it just once or twice, otherwise it will be more like a mess. Now I rather let it all completely dry and then finish. Once everything is dry, let's create brown. Of course you can use ready-made browns. Burnt sienna is great. Mix your orange with your greens. Be creative, get a variety of browns. And with the tip of the brush, so a little bit step down, little branches on the top. The more we get in down, the more thicker and defined the branches are. They have some movement. Sometimes they're covered with the greenery, and sometimes they're not. They are on top. Just try to get the shape, the idea of the shape. For example, it's a little bit rounded on the right side. And let's add a couple of details just in green, for example, sap green, couple of basically dots, small elements in some areas, like this. Dancing with the brush, painting simple brush strokes, but they will bring this nice, lovely idea of the tree, a lot of leaves. And of course, let's also add big, dark, contrast green to the darker parts. We created some texture around, but it's also great to add a bit of details. So, trunk texture as the final touch. Basically just slide in your brush from top to bottom on the tree trunk. As a final touch, I would like just to add a bit of some greenery behind the fence. Very light, nothing precise, like this. And now our quick tree is ready.
Thank you so much for painting with me. I hope you enjoyed the process. I hope you learned something new. Please let me know in comments what would you like to paint next, and see you soon. Bye bye.